So with park strips, now these are very interesting spaces, and I'm going to cover a lot of the details of what you need to consider. But park strips are a challenge because they're narrow, they're hard to irrigate, and for the most part, you technically are not the owner of your park strip. It's a city, it's a public utility easement, and so there are some limitations on what you can do. And I'll get into these details as we go. Now, this class is actually part of the overall Localscapes program. Now, the Localscapes is a concept and it's a program that it's about landscaping for where you live. So it's plant adaptations and considerations for your yard in whatever place you live in. If it's Salt Lake County, if it's Utah County, if it's, it's Idaho, it's right here in, Layton or anywhere. So it's knowing and understand principles so that you can make the adaptations necessary to be successful and have something grow and thrive and look beautiful in your yard. So we'll use the Localscape things. We'll be tying all that into here. But park strips are just a small piece, but it's a great place to start. If you're struggling to know, what do I do in my yard? I've got all these things. Well, park strips are usually separate enough and defined by the sidewalk and the curb and the road. That's the place you want to start, and then you can move into tackling the other more difficult places of your yard, getting a little experience and a little background and understanding. So we'll show you these references to the typical Utah front yard. And if you've taken some of the other Localscape classes, you've seen this little illustration, our little model, our Localscape model. So this is kind of representing the traditional Utah landscape. It's a sea of grass in the park strip. You've got islands and planting beds up around the house. And so that's kind of typical. This would represent a Localscaped front yard. Notice the park strip, a defined area of lawn, which is a design element as well as functional. And then you've got plant beds, pathways, gathering spaces, entertainment areas, all those other things incorporated in that are designed purposely for the function that they're going to provide, as well as the beauty they're going to provide. All the while, irrigating them very efficiently so that you don't waste water and you're really having everything you want in a landscape watered effectively. So we're going to start with just, I'll show you some examples of this. There's lots of ways to do this. There is not one size fits all approach to park strips. There's so many options because each of you will have a different preference. You're going to have certain tastes and styles of colors, of textures, of what you'd like to see. And so if you are in Salt Lake County, for example, now I say this, there is an actual Flip Your Strip program. It's an incentive program that offers a rebate to change your park strip. Currently, that program is only offered in Salt Lake County. Now, being that we're part of Localscapes and we're expanding, we hope to be able to do that same program in our service area within Davis, Weber, and Morgan Summit counties, but it's not in place yet. And I'm not sure on a time frame of when it will be. However, if you live in Salt Lake County, this is actually a program that's in place. Just go on the Localscapes website. You can go to Jordan Valley Water's website and find information about Flip Your Strip. But the principles, everything's the same. Everything's tied in together. So you can, you can find out and you can do this, whether you're getting an incentive or not, you can do this. You can do it on your own or you can pay a contractor. So the program again is called Flip Your Strip and it's offered in Salt Lake County. So moving on, park strip, let's first talk about problems. There's a lot of problems with park strips, and from a design perspective or a planning perspective, there's not a lot of problems. It's a public utility easement. All the utilities tend to run in here. Notice your water meter is in there, your secondary water meter is in there, there's gas lines in there, there's the cable and internet, fiber lines, all running in this little strip between your sidewalk and your road. Some of them are just crossing that strip while others are running parallel to their curb and sidewalk in this area that we call a park strip. There's some, even in some of the newer neighborhoods, you're buried electrical. There's no more electrical power lines up above. They buried all that and it's running in those park strips. So it's a public utility easement. But the challenge on the water side and the landscaping side is that sprinklers really aren't designed to irrigate these small spaces. And so they become a challenge to water. They're a challenge because you have hot surfaces on both sides. And many times, more often than not, when construction happens and all this stuff, the soils that are in those park strips are just terrible. It's usually a lot of road base, leftover concrete chunks and all kinds of stuff, sometimes asphalt chunks that get left behind. And then landscapes come in, they put a thin layer of topsoil and throw some sod on there. And so it's a huge challenge to try to keep these places watered effectively, looking good because of that narrowness and irrigation and everything else. So ideally, you shouldn't be irrigating with spray heads for anything less than 8 feet wide. I realize they do manufacture, sprinkler companies make a strip type head, but they're really not that great as far as good coverage without water waste and a lot of water running down the gutter. So an average lawn park strip uses about 7,000 to 10,000 gallons per season. And we know this because of sub-metered park strips. We actually have an engineer in our office that tore out his park strip, and before he tore it out, he metered it, put a meter just on the valve that runs the zone that waters his park strip. And he actually did come up with 8,000 gallons in one season. And he's since torn it up. He's since doing some things, and he's tracking water use, and we'll have some good numbers to compare, versus turf versus other types of irrigation, drip irrigation with perennials. So it's a lot of water going in that small space. And for the most part, this space doesn't have a lot of function unless you live on a parade route, and then it only has a function once a year when that parade happens. But most of the time, kids are not playing there. You're just mowing it. It looks green, but it's not a real prime functional spot for the yard. There's a few other problems, of course, with park strips. As you get trees out there, sometimes too large of a tree, it lifts and breaks concretes, curbs, and walkways. You've seen this before, and you get the wrong tree in that narrow space, this will happen. It happens every time. And you can't prevent it. The tree just does its thing, and then it's going to lift the concrete. So that's another problem. Adjacent, I already talked about this, adjacent hot surfaces. It's just hard to keep those areas cool and from getting burnt. And then salt, road salt, applied, every winter in our climate. Depending on the area you live in, the street you live on, this may not be a huge deal. Some of the residential neighborhoods, they're not heavily salted, but nonetheless, they get salted a little bit, and then the plows push everything off and it ends up in your park strip. Depending on what you have planted there, it can certainly burn your plants, burn your grass, and it just creates a problem. So let me hold on just a second there. I think somebody was saying they're getting some audio feedback, so I've just made one adjustment. I'm hoping that helps. If not, it may be something on your end with the audio, but hopefully that I just made one little adjustment on mine with the sound. I hope that helps with the audio problem there. So anyway, okay, so back to this. You got road salt, you got narrow spaces, you got all kinds of stuff. So those are the problems. Some people just refer to this space as, a hell strip. It gets hot, it's just hard to manage, it's hard to irrigate, you get weeds, you get all kinds of problems, and it's hard. So we want to help you tonight understand it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to do this that can be attractive, lower maintenance. It's not zero maintenance. You can't do anything that's zero maintenance. Even concrete requires a little bit of maintenance. But we want to help you understand you can do some things that are going to make it nicer, make it easier to deal with. And of course, we're interested in the water savings that comes from this while keeping a beautiful and attractive, aesthetic, pleasing place. All right, so park strip, a flip strip park strip. Notice the difference here, the lawn with weeds. This one, of course, is not well cared for. This was lush green compared to the other piece here. You'd see a contrast. And some people really love the nice uniform manicured lush green. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just suggesting keep that nice lush green on the property side of the sidewalk and do something else with this narrow strip that's hard to irrigate and hard to deal with. Notice the color, the interest, the textures. You can create a lot of neat stuff here. All right, so I've already talked a little bit about this, your park strip ownership. So I'm gonna just mention a little bit about the cities, who actually owns this, and some of the challenges. Technically, the city owns this. However, you technically pay the property taxes for the area and you have to maintain it. But when it comes right down to it, you really don't have much say. I mean, some cities are not that particular, or they're not going to enforce an ordinance, but I would bet, and from what we've found with cities, they all have an ordinance. They may not enforce it unless there's complaints, and then they will enforce it. So before you do anything, please check with your city on their ordinances regarding that space, for the city. Every city is going to be a little different. Some will require at least, 50% cover of plant material. Some will require 80% or 70%. For the Flip Your Strip program, one of the requirements, especially if you're getting a rebate, is that you have 60% plant cover. Meaning when the plant is mature, all the plants growing, including trees actually count for a big part of that, even though the canopy is high, is that you have 60% plant cover. The rest could be rock, it could be mulch, it could be bare, but you have to have 60%. Some of those cities some cities we've actually found still require lawn in the park strip. They will make exceptions and allowances, but their ordinances are outdated and they require lawn in the park strip. So please check those, check the codes. Now, if you live in a homeowners association, that's a whole unique, different challenge, because the city may have an ordinance and then your HOA has a different regulation. They'll require a certain number of trees with only a certain types of trees, or they will require lawn. So if you live in an HOA, that's kind of your unique challenge, is you have to deal with the HOA rules aside from the city rules. And if your HOA is just a real stickler for stuff, good luck. It's always good to approach and make some suggestions and try to deal with some things. Homeowners associations have been known to fine residents and, really make an issue out of some things. So please always check the best practices in your ordinances for that space. Like I said, technically you own it, but you don't own it. You really don't have a lot of say sometimes when it comes to these things. So, as I just mentioned, the best practices for the Flip Your Strip are 60% plant cover. Ground covers and continuous plants must be shorter than 24 inches. Now, this is actually some of the requirements and ordinances as well. The reason being is you don't want really tall material that blocks view obstruction. So if you're backing out of your driveway and you can't really see what's in the road, that's a problem. If somebody's driving down the road and maybe there's a kid there, they can't see that kid that's, just a young kid, and that kid needs to cuts out where the driveway approaches, that's a problem. So plant material, aside from trees, there's always the tree allowance, and trees are going to get tall and they usually trimmed up so you can see under them. But any perennial or shrub material must be 24 inches or shorter. And individual accent plants, I guess, maybe up to 36 inches, like that yucca that's in this picture, because it's just one individual plant with just a stalk or something that sticks up a little above the 24. But the majority of the plant, if it's thick and full, 24 inches. Tall accent, little spiky things could be slightly taller. The main thing with this is maintain visibility for car safety, for kid safety. And aesthetic appeal. If that thing's just a jungle and everything's 6 feet tall, it's not going to be acceptable and your city won't allow it. So here's an example of that. Now, hollyhocks are awesome. They're great, but they do get tall. This would actually not be acceptable, even though it looks great and the homeowner might love this, because of the obstruction. Because if it was just one plant on one end or the other, or even a couple in the middle, it would be fine. But because there's so many of them, the average height of those plants is too tall. You're limiting visibility, and so that's not a good practice, not acceptable in these types of programs. Now let's talk about hard material. Any type of concrete or permanent pavement is also not recommended. It can be used in the Flip Your Strip program if your plant density does not, if your plant density is still at 60%, and then you can have sections of concrete pathways or something. But you need to think about this, because it's a utility corridor. Utilities may need to come and dig in that space at some point or another, now, 10 years from now. And if they have to dig up concrete, more often than not, they will not replace concrete because it's a utility corridor. They don't want things in there that are permanent and make it very difficult to access the utility. So if you have some perennials and some shrubs, those can be dug out, set aside, digging can happen, and then they can actually be planted back into the place they were. Grass can be planted back where it was. Trees, not so much. If they have to remove a tree in a park strip, it's gone. You got to plant a new one, unless it's very small still. But so consider using hardscape very minimally. Although I'm going to show you some options here in a minute where you can use pavers and flagstone and different things like that, because those things can be removed and put back. Unlike concrete or asphalt that are poured and rolled or smooth and hardened, pavers and those kind of things, they can easily be put back in the same order that they were in without having additional costs. Or, I mean, there's some time and labor, but not, you know what I mean. So here's some steps. We'll go through each of these on how to reclaim a park strip. Now, if you have a brand new landscape, you could follow these same steps. The easy part is you don't have to worry about the removal of the lawn. You can skip that step. But otherwise, if you have existing, these are some steps that we're going to go through tonight to help you. So number one, you're going to plan, you're going to remove lawn, convert to drip irrigation, add the hardscape pathways, connection points, and then of course the plant material. So with that, sorry, I get talking really fast and occasionally I have to take a deep breath. If I am talking too fast for whatever reason, let me know. I will try to slow down a little. So let's talk about this, the planning and designing. This is not necessarily a huge step where you think, oh no, I don't know anything about design. This is just you thinking about what do you need or what would you like it to look like? Do I need a pathway across it, an access point? And do people park on the curb and want to cross? So do I incorporate two pathways, one pathway? What's this pathway going to look like? And then the plants. Do I already have some trees there? Does the city require some trees? What are those trees? And we'll get to some plants here at the end, the plant choices, but it's kind of colors and textures. Do you want rock mulch? Do you want bark mulch? Do you what kind of look? So you don't have to worry about detailed measurements at this point yet, although you will want to get some measurements. You need to know the space. Typical park strips are about 5 feet wide. It can range though from 3 to 5, and I've seen park strips as narrow as 2, but the typical is somewhere to 4 to 5 feet is pretty standard for a park strip. They can range, like I said, depending, but this is just the time where you're going to start thinking about the ideas. You can get some measurements, and then you can even start doing the homework on the plant material. But you want to be able to have a plan in place so that once you start, you don't get bogged down and think, oh no, now what do I do? And then you skip a couple years and then it just turns into weeds and it becomes a giant mess. All right, so let's talk about some plans for a second. On the Localscapes website, so localscapes.com, to help you with design, there are some pre-designed park strips and they're themed a little bit. This slide right here is just showing you one. It's called the Utah Park Strip Design. Now, what they do, what these plans help you with is they're done in 30-foot blocks. So if you have a 60-foot park strip, you take this and repeat it twice. If you have a 90-foot park strip, you repeat it 3 times, or you can take short half of it and adapt it to your landscape. But the design itself is done in a 30-foot block so that you can take that and then adapt it to whatever length you want. The idea though is you have uniformity, and so you keep with the same plant palette, the same general spacing of plants throughout the whole thing for a uniform and nice look. So there's several examples that are free, or you could take and modify those. If you don't like the plant choices that are suggested in those pre-made designs, well, then you substitute the plant material, but you can kind of leave the spacing. So here's just if that's one site. You can go to some pre-designed park strip plans that are super easy for you to hopefully incorporate. So this is the fun one. I love this picture. I actually added this picture in there because I just think it's cool. And I actually like to get out and dig in the dirt. I like to get in the garden. There's something about digging in the dirt that's maybe a little bit of therapy or therapeutic for me. But this step is where you're removing what's there. Or if you're starting brand new, this is the prep. You're prepping the area so that you can then move forward with new plants and all the other stuff you're doing. Now, this picture shows a crazy large digging machine, which I think that would be fascinating to watch something like that in action. I'd love to see that. But you don't need this. You don't need crazy equipment. You don't have to rent a backhoe or an excavator. You can do all this with just regular equipment. Now, if you have sod, you may need to rent a sod cutter. You can rent them at rental equipment places or at Home Depot. You can rent a sod cutter for a half a day or for a couple of hours. It's pretty cheap. And you can do all the sod, and then you're going to have to do a little manual digging, of course. And I'll talk about how to kill the grass and do some of that here in just a second. But there's no reason to spend a lot of money, and there's no reason to necessarily hire somebody to do this part of it, unless, of course, maybe it's age, ability, just time. There's a lot of reasons why you would maybe want to hire somebody, but you don't need to for this step. Digging, this kind of machine would be awesome. It would tear your whole thing to pieces. But yeah, anyway. All right, so here's some methods to remove existing lawn. If you have lawn and you need to kill it, remember, you do need to have the grass completely dead or killed or dug up. You don't want to do a whole park strip and have remaining roots and rhizomes in there that are going to just grow and fill this whole thing back up with grass. You'll fight the grass and perennials and all that. You don't want that. So your lawn needs to be killed down through the roots before you remove it. You can do it with plastic sheeting, or you can do it with herbicides. There's not really an organic method or like organic substance that's going to kill the lawn that I know of. I mean, something fairly acidic, I don't know of any, and I've never used any. Plastic sheeting is the organic method you could use to kill off this lawn. Now, this is best done in the hottest part of the year. So if you're thinking of doing this now, putting a plastic sheeting out there isn't going to kill the grass. It's going to warm it up and get it growing, but you need warm temperatures and really good sunlight. And essentially what the plastic sheeting is doing, you're cutting off the water supply and you're cooking the grass. And it needs heat, it needs light, and you're going to cook it. Okay, and that takes a little bit of time. If you don't have that time, and you don't mind using an herbicide like glyphosate, which is Roundup or other kills all type herbicides, then you spray those, and you may need 2 applications, sometimes even 3, to make sure that grass is completely dead before you remove it. Now, if you don't want to use either of these and you want to rent a sod cutter or dig out the sod, you can do that also. It's a third option. And as much as I hate to say this, if you're thinking, well, what do I do with all this sod when I dig it up? If some people on new lots or they're doing a brand new landscape, they want a little bit of grass, you could post something on KSL that says, free sod. It's going to be available on Saturday, such and such, at this address. It's out on the curb. Come and get it. If you rented a sod cutter, rolled those up, stuck them out there, I would bet you someone's going to come and pick up that grass, and you won't even have to worry about hauling it away. Okay, so those are a couple options. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself on the slides. I'm talking about sod cutter, and there's a picture of it. Okay, you could also you could till it. Tilling, though, doesn't get rid of the rhizomes. So if you're tilling it, make sure the grass is dead. Then you can till it, and then you would just have soil. You can remove the excess soil and actually incorporate it somewhere else in your landscape. If you need a little soil somewhere to raise a bed, do something. Getting rid of all that dirt is not necessary. You can simply incorporate it somewhere else. So be careful, though, if you're using equipment like a sod cutter or a tiller. You want to mark existing sprinklers or heads. And then I've got a slide in here. This is it. Yeah, I was just thinking, wait a minute, I got the slide somewhere. Before you do anything with equipment or dig, always call the 811 number. It's Blue Stakes, it's free. They're going to come out and they're going to mark all the utilities. And so the different companies will mark, red if it's electrical, yellow if it's gas, orange if it's like a cable, cable line, internet line. You'll see blue with water lines, purple with secondary water lines. Each of them has a color. They'll mark that up for free. If you don't call and you hit one of those utilities and damage it, it will be your responsibility. They will make you pay the cost of repair for whoever has to come and fix that. But if you call and they mark it incorrectly and a line is damaged, it is not your responsibility anymore. So it's your protection to call and make sure you know where the utilities are before you dig. Most of them are below shovel depth. However, before cell phones were huge, I still had a landline phone. I called Blue Stakes, they marked it. I was digging, and 4 inches down, I cut the phone line, and it was marked. The phone line was not, the marking for the phone line was about 2 feet away from where I was digging. So I cut my phone line, and of course, I wasn't responsible because they had marked it. They had marked it incorrectly, and besides that, it was only 4 inches deep. And so do consider and make sure you call 811 before you dig anything, and make sure it's, especially in the park strip, that's where everything is. And inevitably you'll probably run into something depending on you're planting, you're doing all these things. So be very, very careful there. The main utilities though, the big ones, gas lines and everything, they're deeper than that. You're not going to hit those with a shovel depth. You better not. They're usually 2, 3, 4 feet down. But it's the other utilities, the internet lines and so forth. Some of those may not be that deep. All right, so back to removing existing. Once you remove everything, try to remember to take the grade down below the concrete. This slide says 3 to 4 inches. Usually you're okay to about 3 and no less than 2. Now the reason being is you want that grade below, because you're going to be digging and adding plants, and then you're going to add mulch. And if your mulch, you don't want the mulch up above the concrete to be able, if it's bark, to go over into the curb, onto the sidewalk. So you grade it down below, you plant everything, you add a couple inches, 2 to 3 inches of mulch, whether it's rock or bark, and those 2 edges of concrete retain your mulch into that space. It helps keep it tidy, keeps it in. So great. Anytime you remove all the existing stuff or start brand new, make sure your finished grade when you're ready to plant is 3 inches below walk, okay, or with minimum. So then after you've got it down to grade, now we're moving on. We've removed everything. We've designed, we've removed. Now you may still be designing at this point. If you haven't completely decided, you could still be removing everything. But at this point now, once everything's removed, you really need to make sure your design is firm. You need to know what you're doing, because now you're going to be installing and fixing up the irrigation so that it'll be effective for everything you put in. Now you need to put in, we're recommending you put in drip irrigation. It's not going to overspray anything. You're going to get water directly to the plants you need when you need it. Now, one other thing I mentioned, actually I think I show this, the park strip should be on its own irrigation station, its own valve, its own zone. All those are all terms for the same thing. So your irrigation zone needs to, the park strip should run independent of anywhere else in your yard. So it can be set on its own time, its own schedule if needed, through your timer, through your controller. So drip irrigation is a recommendation. It's a must if you're getting rebates in the Flip Your Strip in Salt Lake. Drip supplies, again, drip supplies water directly to the plants. It minimizes waste, and it's actually pretty easy to install. You don't need glue, you don't need anything. You can set this up yourself, okay? So here's an example of inline drip tubing. Now notice how it's kind of curvy, but it's lines that parallel each other, but they're flexible. So you can snake them around a little bit. The idea though, is the inline tubing has an emitter built inside the tube, inside the plastic pipe. There's a pressure regulating emitter. And those emitters, you can buy the tubing with emitters at 12 inches, 18 inches, 24 inches, whatever the density of planting kind of dictates which kind of tubing you would buy. Now, this would be recommended if you're doing densely planted areas or lots of ground covers that you want to fill in, because this will put water down, and over time it kind of basically waters the whole area evenly. If you space those properly, parallel together, you know, if you have a 12-inch emitter spacing and you space the lines 12 inches apart, you will get an even watering throughout the bed, throughout this park strip, okay? So it says best to run at least 3 rows of inline drip. For some park strips, you may want to run 4, okay? And if you're using inline drip tubing. The other method, let's see if I know, let me go back to this one. See the point source drip with an emitter? So it has a main line, and then you're punching in and you're putting in an emitter to each plant. Now you would only do this if you have very sparse plantings. Let's say you only have a couple of trees and maybe you just want a couple random perennials in there. You would use one poly line that goes the length of your park strip, and then you would punch in and put in the 1/4-inch tubing with an emitter at each of those plants, and then you'd put multiple emitters around the trees. All right, so sprinkler valve, you kind of already probably know what that is. It's used for lawn and drip. I mean, spray heads, drip heads, the same type of valves are used. The only difference when you're using drip irrigation is that usually then it includes a filter and a pressure regulator, a reducer. And so what that's doing is any debris that would potentially get stuck in the small emitter outputs gets stuck in the filter instead, and it's reducing the pressure. You can't operate drip irrigation on high pressure. It'll just blow the little emitters off, and it just doesn't operate correctly. Drip irrigation runs on very low pressure. You need a pressure regulator and a filter. It doesn't have to be at the valve. It could actually be installed, if you're retrofitting a sprinkler system, it can be installed right out at the park strip. You cut the pipe, you put a pressure regulator right in the pipe with that little filter, just a little teeny round irrigation cover, and then you can connect your drip irrigation to that, and then modify the system from there. And when we have a full irrigation class, it's going to be coming up, where I have all these parts and pieces that I can show you. We'll do show and tell. We'll show how they're set up. We'll show the configurations. It's a little harder to do online, but we've done it successfully. So if you're questioning irrigation, this will get into just the very, very basics, but we get into some real depth on an irrigation class, and it's a full 2-hour class because there's really a lot to talk about with irrigation. So here's the picture of that filter and pressure regulator. Just really helps drip irrigation operate effectively. It's the right pressure, the right flow volumes, and you're set. Typical drip irrigation, if you need to know, operates somewhere. This regulator that's shown in this picture, it's actually says 150 psi or something like that. You're looking for a pressure regulator that'll bring the pressures down to about 30 psi. Now the different drip products can use a differing amounts. Some drip for vegetable gardens and some different things, you can reduce it all the way down to 10 or less. But for your average sprinkler drip stuff, that for park strips, probably around the 25 to 30 psi is perfect for that drip stuff. All right, so let me see. It looks like Hetty Ann's taking care of all the questions. Is it, if there's a question, Hetty Ann, that you can't answer, just leave it there. I'll get to it in just a second, or you can, let me know. So park strip irrigation, typically, this is showing a spray heads and a spray zone, like where the spray heads are and how they spray. Of course, they're spraying on the road. This is kind of typical what you might see. Some of them would be spraying back towards the home, but they'd overspray the sidewalk. And anyway, it's a challenge. But you can retrofit those spray heads. Now I'm going to get back to this same thing where we show which heads get blocked off, which ones you're going to cap, and which ones you're going to convert to a drip type of product. So here's a few of the ways to do that. So notice in the left hand side, you have what looks like the top of a sprinkler head. Well, it is. You leave your sprinkler heads in place, but they sell little retrofit kits. What you do is it just switches out the insides of the head, but then with a threaded piece on top, then you can thread that little piece of PVC to a little drip, what do we call it, coupler, and then the poly tube connects right to that without glue. The pressure regulations brought it all down. And from there, now you're ready to go with drip tubing. So it's relatively simple. You don't have to dig up all your sprinkler heads. You do have to make some sort of separation, either back at your valve or right before the park strip area to make sure you're not running spray heads and drip at the same time anywhere. But real easy conversion. The middle picture here it's called the Zero Bird. It's a Rainbird product. It connects also to a riser where your sprinkler head would have been, connects right on. You screw that on there, and then drip tubing comes out of the bottom of that. You can direct it to individual plants. And then on the right there, again, it's a sprinkler head with just the conversion part. So they sell what they call drip conversion pieces, drip conversion kits. And so it makes it easy because you don't have to worry about digging everything up and figuring out, oh no, now what do I do with these? Now, you only need to do these usually on 1 or 2 heads. And then with the rest of the heads, you just unscrew them and put a cap or a plug in the line where that head was. So you will have to dig right there where the head was just to unscrew it and cap those others off. But it makes it really easy to retrofit and convert from spray to drip, especially in a park strip. So maybe you have 10 heads, 10 spray heads in your park strip. You cap off probably 8 of them. You leave 2 of them. You connect the drip tubings to them, and you're ready to go on drip tubing and ready to water. So here's that same picture. All the yellow ones have been capped. The red are the retrofitted sprinkler heads, and then the dashed line is the drip tubing. So relatively speaking, setting up or converting this irrigation is not really that challenging or difficult. You can do this. Now, if you happen to have a park strip where the spray heads are larger and they were designed to spray your front yard as well, then it's a different thing. It's a whole different challenge because you do need to move that sprinkler line into the main part of the lawn and set up a drip for the park strip. You can't effectively water a park strip that's been converted and lawn with the same volumes and be successful. It usually just never works out. You have problems, something goes wrong, and you still waste a ton of water. So always separate it out. If you have specific questions about how to move all those around, that irrigation class will help, or we can certainly help later. I forgot to mention too, if you're panicked, we're recording this webinar tonight. So you can come back and reference and either look at some slides or watch the video again to listen again. If I've gone through something fast, this will be recorded. You can rewatch it again. And so it'll be posted on our website. It usually just takes a couple days and we'll have it up there. Let's see, there still looks like there's one question in there. Nope, Hetty Ann's on him. She's got him. Let me get out of that. Okay, so here's this picture again, a valve box. You got your spray heads on the lawn side connected to the drip irrigation, or it's connected to the spray irrigation in the park strip. So here's what you could do in that case, but you would need to add another valve. So let me go back one slide. Notice there's only one valve in the valve box. Well, they've dug that up, connected out another one, dig a line across, separate that out, and now you have a separate zone for your park strip. That's one way to do that. There's other ways. That's the best way, wherever your valves are, and trying to get it back to the valve box, because then you're wiring from your time clock. Usually there's wires already there and you can make it work. If you don't have any more wires and you have some struggles there are battery operated valves that you could use, but then it's not part of your main time clock, but it would operate independently, and then you change out a 9-volt battery once a year to that battery operated valve, and it could be put anywhere in the yard. So kind of consider that as well. All right, let's go into existing trees. Mature trees in the landscape, they get, of course, they're going to need a lot of water to be maintained. You can't just cut off water supply to these. They've been, if they've been watered with lawn, they're getting plenty of water and so forth, but they're going to still need water. So the black lines that I've shown on this picture that kind of go straight down, you kind of want to look at the tree drip line. It's going to need water in that drip line somewhere. You don't really need to go too far beyond that. Some tree roots will go out, of course, but if you can get water in that drip line of the tree, you're going to be fine in the canopy. Okay, so once the grass is removed, still be considering, I've got trees out there, don't remove the trees. As part of changing out your park strip, it's never recommended that you remove trees. Trees do add a lot of value. The only time you'd recommend removing a tree is if it's causing problems with the concrete, creating a hazard where somebody's going to trip on a sidewalk that's lifting. And sometimes cities will do that anyway. They'll come and they'll take care of that. They'll remove a large tree that's causing some problems there, or they'll try to adjust and fix the sidewalk somehow. If the tree is that big, causing those kind of problems, it may need to come out, but be careful there. We don't want to recommend tearing out a bunch of mature trees for this stuff. Mature trees do add some value. They're beneficial. So to continue to water these mature trees, inline drip irrigation is a good way to do this. Now you can use point source. Point source means you're directing an emitter. That emitter controls volume, and it's directing a specific amount of volume to the tree. But you usually need to apply multiple emitters in that area. Now, if you've got perennials and stuff in there too, the trees will take advantage of any water that's being put in that area. So if you're already watering perennials, a lot of times you don't need to add a lot of extra for the tree. Maybe you increase the runtime just a little extra water. But if you don't have other material, use inline drip tubing. So you can make rings around the tree. Now in this case, this ring's pretty close. They don't have to be that close to the trunk. You could extend those, although you got to consider this park strip's narrow. So the rings do not have to be perfectly circular either. They can be oblong rings. And you can do this. And now if you're adding inline drip anyway for other perennials, then you just run those parallel lines and they're going right over the root zone of the trees. And so you don't have to worry about rings. If I've already got parallel lines in there, don't try to overcomplicate this. But they just need water, trees need water, and you're gonna get it to them through either this method, adding 3 or 4 or 5 drip emitters, specific point source emitters in that area, or other plants that are gonna provide it. Now, if you don't set up a drip or an irrigation system of any kind, and you really don't want any plants out there, but you have a few trees, then make it a point to once a month or something, try to put a hose out there on a really slow trickle and deep water those trees once a month. Let it just trickle on that tree for an hour, soak it up really good once a month, and those trees should be just fine. Okay. All right. So if there's still some questions about drip irrigation, let's see. I think Katie Ann's answered most of them. It looks like she's answered all those questions. So if there's additional questions on drip irrigation, post them. We'll get to them, or we can talk at the end. All right, so now we've removed it. We've planned, we've removed everything. We've got it to grade. We fixed up the irrigation how we need it. Now let's do the hard elements. If you want rock material or some pathways or something crossing, this is the step where now you add the physical elements that aren't going to be growing. This is the step of all the fun stuff that's not plant material. Plant material comes at the very last with the mulch. So this is to create pass-through areas with so people could walk. And then you're also making sure the path is large enough and smooth enough for safe passage. You don't want a tripping hazard, or you don't want anything like that. So notice the size of the flagstones here, or they're nice and flat. Consider those things, okay? Adequate and awesome. I mean, granted, it depends on how much traffic, what kind of pass-through you need there, and so forth. So, sorry, I keep clicking off of there and then messes up my flow. Hardscape should be permeable to air and water. So if you do flagstone, that's great. Put something between them. Again, I showed you some pictures earlier about concrete. You could concrete these in, but ideally you would like, if it rains, if there's any extra water, it's going through that area and it's going down into the soil to help with any plants or roots that you've got growing down in there. Again, if you don't have plants and you don't want plants, then maybe a little strip of concrete is just right for you, and it's not going to be a big deal. It's hard, it's permanent. Again, though, remember, if a utility digs, they will have to pull all that out, and as sometimes they do not fix it back because of the cost. The cost would all be on you. But in digging in this, you could remove the flagstone. Yes, you'd have to maybe get a little new gravel in there or something, but that's something to consider. All right. If you have these permanent areas, now we just talked about irrigation. So there's one little step in here that you don't want to put heavy rock or materials right on your drip line. So if you're doing those cross pathways, I should have actually stepped back a step, but it kind of fits because now we're talking pathways. Put a PVC sleeve. So you be planning this ahead. So wherever your pathways are, just put a piece of PVC pipe that's bigger than the type of drip tubing you're using. If you're using a 3/4 inch drip tubing, make sure that sleeve is at least 1 inch in diameter, 1 inch pipe or 1.5. And it's just a short piece. You're just doing a short piece right where the path's going to go, so that if any case happens and you need to change something with your drip irrigation, you can slide the drip tubing right through that pipe and you never have to worry about digging up your little pathway, your cross path. Okay. And they sell, if it's inline tubing you're using, they sell pieces of that with no emitters in them. It's called just blank drip tubing. So you can add that in, the little couplers. You can actually cut it and put a little coupler there. Really easy to actually deal with. There's no glue again, nothing involved with gluing those together. So that's a great way to do some of that. So Hardscape materials should be kept 3 feet away from existing or new trees. Again, that's just part of the root zone thing. That's just thinking of compaction, that's thinking of traffic. And as that tree grows, it needs room. That trunk's going to get bigger and bigger. You don't want stuff right up against it that's going to, require you to move it later or cause problems with the growth of the tree. And plus, when that tree starts branching out, you don't want to be walking there and hitting your head on a branch every time you walk through there until the tree gets tall enough that it's pruned up that high. Okay, so keep your material at least 3 feet away from the tree. Let's talk about plants now. So hopefully we've been getting all your questions answered. And if not, we'll stop and talk about those before I show you some good examples after this step. So with plants, this is actually one of the funnest parts of a park strip when you're thinking, okay, now I've got all this infrastructure done. I've got my drip irrigation there. I've got all this stuff done. What am I going to plant? What looks good? Now, this is all personal preference from this point. Although there are some plants that are simply going to do better in that space because of all the conditions I described at the first. So plants should be considered water-wise. They should probably be compact, meaning they're not just tall and floppy everywhere. Some plants have a nice tight habit. That's kind of what you're looking for, something nice, tight. Ground covers that are tight, they should be considered tough. Now, there are lots of lists of water-wise plants and plants that are tough that maybe tolerate a little bit of salt in the winter, tolerate the heat, and they can tolerate some drier conditions and sometimes gravelly soils. You don't want something that loves water and loves really loamy soils because most often your park strip doesn't have that. So, this slide, I've listed a few other things there, salt tolerance recommended, all that stuff. Now notice in the picture, there are bulbs. Now bulbs don't really fit into the perennial, shrub, or anything category. I always recommend bulbs because they're the first things to come up. They look awesome. And then by the time they're done, you can cut those down and then everything else has come in. And for the rest of the season, you've got your regular look of the park strip and the bulbs don't even get in the way. And they don't even need any water. The bulbs take care of themselves. You don't have to try to think, oh no, how do I water each set of bulbs? And no, you don't worry about that. They get plenty of water through the winter. They come up, they bloom, they're beautiful. And then they're done. You cut them back, you leave them alone. You don't even have to dig them up, especially daffodils. So I always like to throw in some bulbs just because of that awesome color and interest in the early spring before everything else is really taking off. All right, so let's talk about plant density. There's several styles, and this again is preference. You've got a low density, meaning you have a plant or two spread out, maybe a few feet apart, and you've just spaced them out throughout the entire thing. Low density. In this case, you'd probably use point source drip because you're directing one bit of drip of water to one plant, and then you've got another plant 3 feet away. So you're only worried about those few plants. A mixed density means you'll have strips that might be high, and then you have spaces, kind of dead plant, not dead, but blank. And sometimes that blank space is really great. It's a design element that kind of draws your eye, it rests your eye. So you have these heavily planted and then kind of empty spaces, and then another heavily planted and empty space. And maybe sometimes you have a tree in the empty space or vice versa. So that's a mixed density. And then you have high density where it's really just packed full of plants, the whole bed. You can't see ground at all. You can't see mulch. And so you need to decide here your preference of plant density because there's no right answer. This is all personal preference at this point. What do you like? How much do you want to spend on time and plants? And what kind of plants are they going to require deadheading? Are they going to require cutting back every year? Those are considerations here on plant density. And then when we get to mulch, ideally you're applying 2 to 4 inches of mulch on top of the surface. Now what this does, regardless of the material, it's going to help retain soil moisture and reduce weeds, even if you use gravel or rock. Now gravel or rock, or what they call is chat or decomposed granite, all these materials are different. Of course, they're going to heat up different. They're going to, they do different things, but all of them benefit like helping create a barrier between air and soil. So you retain more soil moisture and you actually moderate temperatures in the soil. Even though the rock may be heating up, funny enough, it creates a unique thing where the soil temperatures actually stay cooler. So it's personal preference. If you like bark or compost or rock or rock type products, and there's lots of color and texture on rock. It's crushed, it's round, it's smooth, lots of color depending on the source, lots of things you can do there. Okay, so ideally though, 2 to 4 inches. Now I will say at this point, actually I think there's a slide on it. There's a slide coming up in the maintenance section, but I'll mention it now. Weed barrier, I will say weed barrier, use it under rock, but not under bark if you're going to use it, because under bark layer just creates a nice fertile layer for weed seeds to grow anyway. They'll grow on top of the fabric and you've wasted your time and money. Under rock, it happens less, but it can still happen. But if you're cutting tons of holes in it for plants, you might as well not buy it or waste your time with it anyway. Okay, so I've got a slide on that, but maybe right here, let's pause for a second and just deal with a couple questions before I move into the maintenance section, which is really short. And then I've got a bunch of slides that show some really good examples. So this question is, new to the area, 2 young box elder trees in the park strip. When 811 came out, we learned that they are very close to the water and sewer pipes. How deep are those pipes typically placed? Your drinking water line in your house, depending on the development, it can be anywhere, typically, of course, they're below frost line, 3 to 5 feet usually is what they are in depth in that range. As far as your water pipes, your sewer lateral, again, depending on the development, and if you have a basement, if you have a basement, your sewer lateral is probably 8 to 10 feet deep. If you don't have a basement, your sewer lateral could also be down there in that 3 to 4 foot depth. It really depends, and I don't have any more details for you on that. But if you're struggling with that, you can always call some of those plumbers and stuff. They can sometimes tell the depth of your sewer by running one of their things down there, and then they find the depth. And your city should know the depth of your water line simply because of where the meter is placed and how deep that meter is. Hope that helps. All right. So now moving into the park strip maintenance. Okay, this is just going to be kind of quick, but it's important to talk about this because when you're planning, you should always be thinking about, well, how much time and effort is this going to take to keep this up? It might look really cool, but if you have to spend 10 hours a week on it, you don't want that, right? Even if you have to spend 2 hours a week, you want to be able to spend maybe less than a half an hour a week maintaining this, right? And then it'll just work out great. So at establishment, when you first plant everything, you've got your drip tubing in there, but you may still need to do some supplemental hand watering just to make sure the plant's established well the first year. Because your drip tubing's in there and it may not be soaking up in the little teeny plants. Your brand new plants have a root ball that's only right there. It's what came out of that pot, hasn't extended out into the soil. Once it extends out in the soil, it'll capture water from the drip zone area, wherever the water was dripped, and it'll be able to get that water to the plant. But when you first plant, remember, it's just a little container. It's just a little pot basically placed in the soil, hasn't extended those roots. So you may have to do supplemental watering for those first few weeks, depending on when you plant. If you try to plant when it's hotter, you'll have to do a little supplemental watering a little bit longer, simply because of the heat stress on those plants, okay? So keep that in mind for the first couple weeks. And then you can usually scale back some watering after that, the hand watering. Just watch it though. Depending, if you've done point source drip, you won't have to worry about this as much. Depending on how densely you've planted, you won't have to worry about this as much. But once you're established, then, excuse me, your water-wise park strips should be watered deeply and then infrequently. So ideally, in the middle of the summer, depending on your plant selections, you should not need to water this probably more than once a week. Although, if you're using like this picture shows some black-eyed Susans. Black-eyed Susans are great plants. They're kind of an indicator plant, and they're the first to wilt. And so you would probably need, in the heat of the summer, July and August, twice a week. And then in the outside of July and August, you could get away with once a week. But black-eyed Susans are not as tough as some of the others. So if you use those, they're an indicator. They start wilting, it's time to water. Okay. But some of the others, you can easily go once a week, deep watering. They're going to look great. You're not going to have any issues with them. Once they're growing and established, they're going to just be awesome for you. Okay. And then the drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is low volume and slow output. So you always need to increase. Drip irrigation is usually set gallons per hour. And more often than not, it's 1 gallon per hour per emitter. Now you can buy different emitters on point source to have 2 or 2+ gallons per hour, but usually if you just stick with the 1 gallon per hour type something, you're always running this zone for 1 hour because you want 1 gallon per emitter being output. And then depending on the soil structure, depending on some things, excuse me, you may go an hour and 10 minutes, or you may go 50 minutes, but you'll watch that and you'll play with that depending on soils, but typically 1 hour for once a week, once it's established. To get it established, you may go twice or 3 times a week for the same 1 hour. Hope that's clear. All right. Now there's a question about some trees or plants. I'm going to get to some trees, park strip trees, park strip plants here in just a second. I'm going to get to some plant material and show some examples. So if you've had that question, I'll get there in just a second. So maintenance mistakes is watering park strips and park strip plants and other lawn or other things on the same schedule. You don't want to water these together. I've already talked about that. So we won't spend much time there. Have a separate zone. You're not cultivating weeds, you're not wasting water, keeping everything watered appropriately to the type of plant that it is. Not using mulch or putting only a thin layer also does not help with this weed control as much, and it does not help preserve soil moisture as much. So get a good layer of mulch on there, 2 to 4 inches, and it'll help with weed control. It'll help. Now, the reason it helps with weed control is weed seeds need just the right condition. And if you can block the light and you can moderate some temperatures, a lot of those weed seeds won't germinate. They're there. Anytime you disturb soil, you're always going to get new weed growth because the weed seeds are sitting there waiting to germinate under the right conditions. So if you can eliminate some of those conditions that cause germination, you'll eliminate some of the weed problems. All right, local scape weed control recipe. All right, water with drip irrigation, apply 2 to 4 inches of mulch, avoid soil compaction, minimize soil disruption. Ideally, you're only doing the disruption one time when you're prepping. And then after that, you're not digging a lot. You're not constantly stirring it up because that stirs up those weed seeds, like I just said. And I am not one to, I've used herbicides, but we advocate use herbicides only after doing the other cultural practices and always follow directions. If a little is good, a lot isn't better. But just follow the directions and you'll be successful without using excessive herbicides and stuff like that. I mean, I've used Roundup, I've used these things to kill lawn, and I'm not opposed to them, but always use them appropriate and do it after you've done all the other steps. Don't just go out there and start applying herbicides and things like crazy just because. Some mistakes. I've already talked about this. Weed barrier fabric. And this is what I mentioned earlier. It really works temporarily, and over time it just simply builds up a layer on top of it, and weeds germinate right on top and they root into the fabric, and sometimes it's just a pain and a mess to deal with. Besides the fact you're poking a lot of holes in it to plant, which defeats its purpose. And in this case, some studies suggest that it decreases microbe activity, decomposition, adding nutrients back into the soil. So essentially it's killing the soil over time. So we recommend that only under hardscape, rock type surfaces, pathways, those kind of areas. Okay, so that was just a really quick on the maintenance. So now let's go to the plant palette. Okay, this is where we're going to get into some plants for a minute, and I'm going to show you some slides, and I'm quickly running out of time. We have this as a 1 hour class, and I'm already at an hour, but we're going to probably hopefully wrap this up in about another 10 minutes, and then we'll deal with some more questions. So foliage is a designer's secret. You don't always have to have flowers. So if you're thinking about plants, you can get a lot of real cool interest just because of the foliage color or texture that changes everything. So let's just go through several slides, different options. Of course, repeating plants and creating color and interest is orderly. You don't have to have a plant zoo of just one of a whole bunch of things, which creates a little bit of chaos in a way. I actually like having a bunch of different plants, but for the design and for the aesthetic appeal, and actually something that psychologically the eye is repetition of color in an orderly way. So if you have some reds, you don't have to necessarily use the same plant for red, but you have a little bit of red, and then a little bit of something, and then a little bit of red, and a little bit of something. It just repeats, and it unifies everything, keeping things looking very orderly and very appealing to the eye. So repeat color and repeat plants. And if you can't find the same plant, at least find the same color or texture size to create the same effect. Okay, so let's talk about a few. So full sun favorites. Here's one, Sundancer Daisy. I will say, and I'm not going to spend tons of time on each of these. You can come back and reference these slides to see how tall they get and whatever. But these, I will say, these are really cool plants. They're really tough. They do self-seed, and so they kind of migrate a little bit. As long as you understand that they don't get terribly crazy. It's not like they're just masses everywhere, but they move. So it'll self-seed, and then you have a couple other plants a couple feet away. If you understand that and you can manage that just fine, use it. If that kind of stuff drives you crazy, don't use this plant. But it's a pretty plant. It has a long bloom time. So it's a native plant, very low water. We have some of these in an area of our learning garden, never get a drop of water in the summer, and they're just fine. Okay, chocolate flower is a great one. This one smells like chocolate early in the morning when the petals open up. As the heat of the day comes, those petals curl up. It's almost like all the color disappears. There's a little bit of color left. And then the next morning, they're all opened up again. This is a cool plant. It's very informal. So it's not nice and tidy and rounded and that kind of thing. But as far as a tough plant, great smell, nice color. This is a great one. I like this plant, and it does very, very well in those kind of soils and conditions. Firecracker penstemon is a native penstemon with red, spikes, upright. Late spring bloomer. It only blooms in the spring. Occasionally you can get a second bloom if you deadhead it. You cut down the spikes after it's done blooming. About 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide. Great hummingbird attractor, actually. We've seen hummingbirds on this. There's some other penstemons that are red that are also great for that. This one, if the soils are soggy, it will not last. It'll rot and may only last 1 to 2 years. So this one, get it established and then don't water it, or put it in the very, very driest part of your park strip, and it'll thrive and do great. Mexican hat, sometimes referred to as coneflower. No, not coneflower. It's Mexican hat. It has another name, but low maintenance. This one's kind of tall, a little bit informal. Cool little flowers on it. There's a kind of a range of colors on these. You can get yellows. You can get the mix, kind of reds to yellows. Informal but very tough. This is a tough plant. Tolerates extreme, those harsh conditions. You're getting a little water on this with your drip irrigation once a week. Plenty of water. It's going to look great and do fantastic for you. Another penstemon, rondo mix, sometimes called. It's a range of the kind of blues to pinks to purples. They call it rondo mix often because you'll buy one. If it's not flowering, you won't know what color it is until it blooms. But it's always in that range, the pinks to purples to blues. And 2 feet tall, 1 feet wide. A lot of the penstemons fit in this category. They're beautiful flowering. This one, you deadhead it, it will rebloom. I've grown this. I have some in my own yard. It's awesome. I like this plant a lot. Fire chalice, also called Zauschneria. This one it tolerates a little bit of shade. It thrives in the sun. Also a hummingbird attractor, blooms in the fall, late fall and late summer into fall. Just a really good, tough plant. This one spreads also with the clump. So as it grows, the clump gets bigger. So if you need to control it, you just dig parts of it off of the edges and move them or compost them or whatever. It's not an aggressive, just take off spreader like a weed, but it will get bigger over time. It grows and kind of spreads slowly that way. So let's keep going here. Hummingbird mint, also called agastache or agastache. There's several colors of these. There's some people call the one that's great, agastache rupestris. Some people call it the root beer plant. It smells like root beer. It smells like licorice. There's an anise hyssop. These are kind of the hyssops, also known as hyssops. Great perennials. They have a neat color, just a nice foliage color and nice flower color. They range from that orange to the pinks, depending on the variety, the cultivation you get. Summer into fall blooms, many of them. I will say, when you use this one, don't cut it in the fall, cut it in the spring. Sometimes this one will winter kill if it's been cut back in the fall. So if you use this one, cut it in the spring. Catmint, Nepeta, low spreading kind of ground cover type, 1 foot tall, 2 feet wide, spring bloom in blues, it repeats blooms. A great plant, again, for park strips. We're showing you some of the tougher perennials. There are others that are going to fit. This in no way is going to show you the comprehensive list. This is just some suggestions that'll kind of get you thinking about color and some of the great plant options that are available. You know, just for getting outside of the flowering perennials, the grasses. There's a lot of really great grasses that are tough. They're beautiful, and they provide an interesting texture with the seed heads and the color of the foliage. So this one's blue oak grass. Multi-season interest. It's semi-evergreen, so it never completely goes all the way brown. You'll have some brown in there that you rake out. Seed heads can get, you know, a couple feet tall. The plant itself can be, the picture on the bottom kind of shows it at maturity when it's doing its seed heads. It's not a it'll self-seed occasionally, and you'll get another one coming up here or there, but it's not like a weed-like grass where you have these just coming up everywhere. Sometimes the fescues will do that, the blue fescues. But this is a really nice choice for a smaller grass that provides you an interesting blue, nice seed head when it's going to seed in the fall. Excuse me, there are other grasses, the pennisetum grasses. They're like the little honey, little bunny, you know, Cassian. There's a whole bunch of those. Also great little, they're called fountain grasses. And they're the ones that are climate adapted, the ones that are hardy to our zones. The purple fountain grass is not hardy, it's an annual. So don't use that one, but some of the other fountain grasses, they have the seed heads that have the little bottle brush look to them. Those work great as well. Nice look, nice texture. So let's go into some shade plants. Okay, and again, bear with me here as we kind of keep chugging through this. Sedges, now these look like grasses, but they're not grasses. So they give you that kind of that grass look, that decorative grass look, but they're really meant for dry shade. So if you've got a shady park strip with mature trees and you want kind of an ornamental grass look, a sedge, and there's lots of varieties of sedges, can work for that kind of condition. So look for some different sedges at the nurseries. They do sell them, and their range of things. Kinnikinnick is actually an evergreen shrub ground cover. I mean, kind of looks like a perennial, but it's actually a woody ground cover. It can get about 8 inches tall, 2 feet wide, sometimes a little larger. It does actually have a tiny little flower, but it's almost, if you're not looking for it, you won't see it. Kind of an inconspicuous flower there, and it does have a little red berry in the fall. Dead nettle, some of you know this is lamium. There's a few different options with variegations or just straight green foliage, but dead nettle is a great one. Flowers can range from pink to white, 8 inches tall, to it kind of spreads wide, even purple type flowers. Really good shade option. These you will not want to use in the sun. They will just scorch and look terrible. They need that cooler area in the shade, but they do well in dry shade. Just they need that shaded space. Hardy geraniums. These are not your typical geranium you might get, you know, Mother's Day geraniums or some of those. It's a hardy geranium. It's a perennial, good for shade. This is the typical kind of flower, kind of that pink purple bluish. Cranesbill geranium's another one. There's several like that are great. And then plumbago, good for kind of this one, you know, we've had this in full sun. It does best in the shade, but it'll tolerate a little bit of sun if it's a mix where you get a little bit of sun direct and then some shade. Plumbago's a good one. The nice blue foliage, or excuse me, blue flowers. The foliage on these turn nice burgundy like the picture shows in the fall. Nice dark green in the summer. Good option. It is a ground cover. So, you know, it's meant to be a ground cover. It'll spread and kind of take up some space on the ground. So it looks like, before I get into trees, let's see, can you tell me the website for plans that was mentioned early on? Go to localscapes.org. Let's see, no, localscapes.com. And Hattie Ann's going to type that in for you. So, all right, so let's get into trees here real quick. Just a few options of trees. I'm going to show you some example pictures here, and then we'll wrap it up. So a few park strip trees. Now, again, going back to city ordinances, when you're checking with your city, also ask them for a tree list, because some cities actually have very specific trees that they will allow or not allow. So ask them for their tree list, because all the cities have one. But here are a few that are found on lots of the plant lists, okay, the tree list for park strips. And the reason they're on there is because their root masses, how they grow, they can tolerate hotter conditions. Sometimes you see these in parking islands and different things. They're going to be smaller, so they're never going to get really, really tall. In the case of if you live under some power lines and areas where there's still power poles, and they're just not going to buckle the sidewalks because they're going to stay a bit smaller and not ever have that issue. So golden rain tree is one of those. Interesting flowers, salt tolerant, 20 to 30 feet tall and wide at full maturity. So some people might say, well, that's not small. It's not huge either. It's not large considering large trees. It's a medium-sized tree. It works in a park strip. You see these a lot in parking islands. And so it's a nice tree, very tough, water tolerant, or drought tolerant, I should say. Great tree. Little leaf linden is a nice one for, now, don't these sizes on these things, 40 feet tall, 30 feet wide, you're thinking that's not small. If you want something smaller, look for something that actually says smaller. I've never seen a little leaf linden in a park strip get that tall. Now these sizes are what the tree could do given all the perfect conditions. A lot of times in park strips, they're not perfect conditions. And so it does alter how a tree grows. It may not reach its full potential on size. So that's why it's often found on the park strip list, is because it can tolerate the conditions and usually ends up a bit smaller in a park strip. Thick, dense leaf cover, teardrop, natural shape. Not used under utility lines, because your utility lines are usually a little lower than that. So don't use this one if you have power lines. Common hackberry. This one, interesting that it's on the list. And I question this personally because hackberries get so big. They're a 50-foot tall tree and 30 feet wide. They're on the list, I think, because they're salt tolerant, very drought tolerant, and they have typically root structuring that they don't typically buckle sidewalks. However, they're so big when they're fully mature that I would hesitate to use one of these in my own park strip. If I had a choice, I wouldn't use it. I'd use this somewhere else because there's better trees, smaller trees that just don't just obstruct everything. But if you want a really large tree in a park strip, this would be one to consider that's not going to create some of the problems like a sycamore or an oak or some of those others. Zelkovas. There's a few varieties of Zelkovas. This one, City Sprite, is a specific variety with this shape. Green vase Zelkovas. These are, they don't have a lot of mess. These are 20 to 25 feet tall trees. These are meant for under power lines, and especially the green vase, it's shaped like a vase, so it's kind of upright this way, and it works great under power lines. And not everybody loves this tree, but as far as a good park strip tree working under areas where there's power lines or different things, this is a tree to use. And they're tough. They're usually disease resistant. They don't have a lot of problems. Great tree to use here in our local climate. Ivory silk lilac tree. This is not your lilac bush. This is a completely different thing. These are smaller trees, 25 to 20 feet. Smaller tree, also under power lines. This one's borderline hardy, depending on where you live. We tried to grow a couple of these in the garden. They actually got removed for some construction, but they're beautiful trees. It's just, we weren't successful, either that or else we didn't give them enough time before they got taken out for some construction. So I didn't get to see, how these have gone. I'd like to do another one. Beautiful trees, could be a great option for you. Spring snow crabapple. There are several crabapples that could work. Now, look for crabapples that probably are fruitless or have persistent fruit. That means they don't drop the fruit to make a mess on a sidewalk or a curb. Birds will just come and eat them. And look for a crabapple that's small. Some crabapples actually get really large. There are lots of varieties of crabapple that stay small, 25, 20 feet. And if you like pink flowers versus the white flowers, darker foliage versus a lighter green foliage. So there are several crab apples that could work for a street tree application, okay? And they could also work under power lines because a lot of them are small. Now, before I move on from trees, you may be familiar with like a flowering pear, some of those. You can use those. Some trees are just so commonly used, they're not found on these lists anymore. They're starting to have problems, or they're just so common. They're trying to get some plant diversity. When you have plant diversity, oftentimes you have less bug and pest problems, blight problems, viral things. So increasing the plant diversity. So some cities have stopped adding certain trees. You used to probably see the green ash, some of the ash trees, beautiful trees. They started up having too many of them, and then you have the ash borer problems. And so anyway, increasing plant diversity is an important part of this as well, but those are a few. That is by no means the full list of options. Check with your city on your plant list though for trees that they will allow, and HOA is the same thing. Some HOAs are very, very particular about what kind of trees you can plant, to even limit it maybe down to 3 or 4 options, which is kind of a shame. But all right, so let's just go through a couple quick pictures here. At the Learning Garden at our site in Layton, we have done a couple little things with our park strip. Now, it needs a little bit of revamping. We had some construction and some things kind of got a little messed up, but we originally designed this in 4 different sections with 4 different plant palettes. And so at different times of year, you'd see different perennials blooming and different interest. So these are different times of year and kind of the same look, same general direction with the plant palettes that's there. You got the bulbs, you got some spring perennials, and then a little bit later in the season with grasses and so forth. So here's another picture of that same park strip, different times, you know, the little blue ball things, those are alliums. You know, so you can add a lot of interest in things in bulbs. Bulbs actually change the whole dynamic and really improve it. The picture on the right, you've got some of those fountain grasses that I talked about with the little bottle head type brush seed heads. You've got some, now I just lost the name of it. It's Gaillardia. That one, there's a yellow Gaillardia. There's a blanket flower. You know, those type of plants. You got some penstemons. You got some sedums. The picture on the left, that looks like Coral Canyon Twin Spurs, is a pink flowering thing. You've got lots of options if you like this. This would be considered kind of a medium to high density planting, and you know it's use drip irrigation just like I've recommended. I apologize, this picture's a little blurry. This picture shows some desert 4 o'clocks, and there's only about 5 of them planted. Desert 4 o'clock is a perennial that gets large and it can take up the entire park strip. It forms a taproot and then it grows out from that taproot every year. So when it's done, it dries up back to the taproot, you remove the whole thing, and in the wintertime, it looks like there's nothing there. It's basically invisible because the whole top dried up, you've removed it and disposed of it, and then next spring it grows from that crown again and it fills the space again to the point that you need to trim it off of the curb and the sidewalk. Desert 4 o'clocks can get about 8 feet in diameter, depending. They also don't need much water. So you could get them established, then you could just simply water the trees and leave everything else alone. That's one option. And the picture's blurry. I apologize for that, that it's just not a great picture. This picture was in a home that I had in South Jordan. Well, now it's been 15 years ago, but I did this in that home, had some other waterways landscaping and stuff around there, but that's an option. It was easy for me. I actually didn't have irrigation in the park strip at the time. I hand watered the trees and I just left the desert 4 o'clocks on their own. And so desert 4 o'clocks are easily acquired from, you can get them from seed, you can buy them from nurseries. And that's the typical flower you get. They can get about 18 inches tall, 12, 18 inches. Great plant, tough, not a solution for everybody, but a solution nonetheless for some. All right, so here's a sparsely planted park strip. This would be low density, you know, just using a rock type thing, a few grasses, very low maintenance, low inputs. And this is a style. If you like this, you know, you like it, you go with that. So let me just keep going through here just quickly again. Another option, again, apologize, some of these pictures are just not fantastic, but this one shows like a Missouri evening primrose. The pink may be an ice plant or a phlox. You can add lots of color and interest. There's so many options. This is just another option for you. Just trying to cruise through these. Again, low density here, blurry photo again. I apologize. Let me get past the blurry photos, okay? Here's one that's mostly rock mulches. You've got your flagstone cross pieces in here, Russian sage, some grasses. Again, very low water, very low maintenance. This style doesn't appeal to everybody, but again, I'm showing you some options here. And this one's fun. Whoops, I went too far. This one's fun. I'll get to some questions here in just a second that you've got. Hold tight to your questions, and then I'll get back to some of these, and Hattie Ann's answering some. You can even plant melons or cucumbers or certain squashes in a park strip. You need water on them, but in this picture, I've got watermelons. The other one looks like cantaloupe. The vines get a little crazy. You have to train them and push them back. But if nothing else, and you just have nowhere else to grow some vines, you could do this if your city allows it. It counts as a crop cover. You got 100% cover there when they're growing. So it's an option. Again, it's not a low water. It's not really a flip your strip option, but I wanted to throw that one in there simply because you can do stuff like this and be successful. So that one picture of the watermelons was actually at our learning garden in a small section. So taking a look here, after one growing season, if you're using sedums, ground covers, notice the first year very sparse, you space plants out a little bit. After one full growing season, you've got things pretty much filled in, and that's all done with inline drip tubing. And look, it looks great. If that's the style and look you're going for, it looks great, and it's filled in and it looks nice. Low maintenance, easy to take care of. If you're, some hand weeding on this is really the only thing you need. If you walked up and down that park strip once a week, spend 15 minutes hand weeding, you'd have that completely under control and not a problem there. So this one's kind of a design with trees. You've got your trees in there and then just a few plants underneath those trees. In this case, one plant type, looks like you've got some sedums in there, some rock, maybe a couple bulbs. Very, very simple, appealing, pretty easy to maintain. You still have some interest in color. And then here, this one is a low density with junipers, grasses, and junipers, grasses, and bulbs. And the bulbs, of course, will be in there in the spring and then they'll fade away. And then really you just have the low growing junipers, you got some grasses. You could throw in a couple other perennials if you wanted. Not necessary, but you could. And, it looks fine. Again, all this is personal preference. Back to some other, barberry and sedums, not my personal preference, honestly, but it's fine for some people. This is completely up to you at this point, what you want it to look like, how comfortable you are with densities, what you want to put in it. Mixed sedums in the middle, creeping thyme lawns, creeping thyme park strips can look great. They're low, they can be walked on, and they flower beautiful in the spring, pretty low input. Once they're established dense like this, they're almost just like lawn as far as keeping weeds out. So creeping thyme is a good option. And then lushly planted park strips, you got color themed type things where you can incorporate lavender and sage, and if you like to, because you could even use those. They're functional as far as herbs go. Sage, lavender, thyme, all those foliage and accent type park strips like the middle. And then on this far one, we got herbs and perennials, which is back to kind of the same thing. You're incorporating lavender, you got other perennials, some usable stuff. Maybe some flowers that you like to cut and put in vases. Most of these low water perennial type things are not, they're not cut flowers, but you could use them like that a little bit. So think of it like this too. The park strip is for you, but it's dramatically different experience for anybody on the sidewalk to see grass on both sides like this or something else. Again, grass is not the enemy. It's just difficult to deal with in this space. So I don't want you to leave this thinking grass is terrible. Grass has a great function. Grass is a great plant when it's used in the right space, in the right way, and watered appropriately. But there's other options, and that's what we're encouraging. You do something different, make it beautiful, make it something that's unique to you, that you can take care of, that you can enjoy, and it just makes things nice for you. All right, so that is basically the end. So we'd encourage you to continue learning. As I mentioned, we've got, if you're still kind of stuck, go back and watch this video again. We'll post the slides online. You can join other free classes. You can visit our garden. So located at 2837 East Highway 193 in Layton. It's right at our main offices. You can go on our website or go to the Localscapes website. Ours is weaverbasin.com. You can go to localscapes.com. And then you can simply just look for, oops, went out of that. You can just look for these ideas. There's lots of resources out there, and come to other classes. Like I said, we have an irrigation class. We have a designing with perennials class. We have, there's lots of classes that'll help you learn the specific aspects of each of these. Let me just stop sharing this now. So yeah, come and learn the specific aspects of things that can help you. And that's what this is about. We're here as a resource and hopefully providing you very accurate and very useful information so that if you go forward, you're doing this with confidence and you're doing it well. We don't want to have you come back, think, oh no, I messed this up and now I got to redo it. We don't want you spending time and money that has to be done again later. So certainly this is for your help. So let's see, where can I get Desert 4 o'clock? So I'm just going to answer some of these questions live. Desert 4 o'clock is available as seed, or you can find them in nurseries. I know they sell them at J&J Nursery because Perennial Favorites is a wholesale grower in Layton that sells those plants to J&J and other local nurseries. If you can't find them, I know Willard Bay Gardens up in Willard also probably sells Desert 4 o'clock. So that should help you with there. So good. There's no other questions. There's just some thank yous. We really do appreciate you coming. We appreciate you joining. I'll just hang on here for just a second and see if there's more questions as they pop in, and I'll answer them. Let's see. Will Weber Basin do water checks this year? Yes. As it looks like things are progressing and changing, we're planning to do water checks. Water checks is basically a water audit. We'll come out and evaluate sprinkler systems. We're changing a little bit of the information we're providing, but we want to come out and provide that for you to help you with understanding your irrigation system and helping you be able to manage it effectively. Right now, we're not scheduling those because there's still a little bit uncertainty, but I would say starting when water is on, starting about mid-April to the end of April, we will start scheduling those because then we'll have a little bit definitive time on how those will proceed. But certainly come mid-May and June, we'll be doing those water audits and other events and different things like that. Chocolate flower. You used to be able to find chocolate flower at a lot of nurseries. Right now, Jerry, I don't know specifically. I would call nurseries before you go to them, especially this time of year, because they're bringing stuff in. So call J&J if you live up here in the Davis County area. Call Willard Bay Gardens and ask them if they have chocolate flower. And if they don't, say, can you get it? And then they may be able to bring it in for you and have it here, by April or May. So hopefully that helps. Some of these plants, they come and go. You'll see them one year in the nursery, then you don't see them again, and then you see them again. Some of it's supply and demand and availability from growers. So just keep looking. And if sometimes you can find it from seed. So hopefully that helps. I guess Hetty Ann's typing an answer, but when the irrigation class is coming up. I should have that right in front of me. Hetty Ann's typing an answer right now. It's coming up the end of, I want to say it's the end of March. It's coming up. And let me just, so everyone else has that one. Hetty Ann just put that in.
I think it's the end of April, Dave.
Oh, end of April. Okay, yeah, look on our website for sure and you can register for that. But certainly that's coming up. A couple other questions here. I have Bermuda grass that's come under the sidewalk to the park strip. Yes, if you have Bermuda grass, you would probably want to use Roundup, and you need to do it multiple times, and you may need to wait even longer before tearing it out. Bermuda grass has some pretty deep roots. They get really stiff and woody, and you can kill the surface and think it's gone, and just a couple months later, it's back because it wasn't completely dead. So make sure it's completely dead. Cut off the water to it. And there is some timing on that. Bermuda grass is a warm season grass. It's not even active in the spring. So you have to wait until those temperatures warm up before Bermuda grass is active. So you're not even going to be able to kill this until June with Bermuda grass. So watch that on the timing, but once it's actively growing, you can certainly kill it with a select, herbicide like Roundup. Just takes a few applications to do it. Great question. So you recommended killing and removing the sod during the summer and then planting in the fall. Yes, certainly. Planting in the fall is a great time to plant. It's actually kind of underutilized. Now, one of the downsides of planting in the fall is sometimes you have less availability of some of the plants in the nurseries. If they've just had a great year and they've sold a lot of stuff, you're kind of limited to what's left. Most nurseries are not bringing in a lot of stuff in the fall. They don't want to overwinter it. And so you do have a little bit less possible options for choice, or just what you're choosing to plant. However, in the fall, you also usually find some better discounts and deals on plants. Some they're trying to clearance them out, they're trying to get rid of them. So sometimes you can get plants for half off. Planting in the fall is awesome. And it's a great time to get them established before winter sets in. And then the next year they're ready to go and they're established. They're doing great. Great question. Appreciate all these questions. I'll stay on here for just another second. Looks like we're quickly dropping off with participants, and I've gone a half an hour past my time. So I'm long-winded, but I'm trying to talk fast. I hope I'm not talking too fast. Looks like that's it. No more questions. We appreciate again you joining us. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off, and we'll look for you joining us on the next classes. And everyone have a good night.